Well, you guys thought I'd probably never get back to it, but finally, I've got the internal engine parts for this 931 balanced. So the holdup was the wrist pins for the J&E pistons required bushings to go from 24 millimeter wrist pin to a 22, if I remember right. And it took a while to get the first set of bushings was wrong size, and then we finally got the right bushings. And even then, the machine shop had to machine them down a little bit. They were like 7 thousandths too long. In other words, a circlip wouldn't fit. So let's take a look at what I just got back from the machine shop yesterday. So yeah, apparently that was the issue as far as getting the locking clip, which you can barely see in there. It's like a piece of wire to hold the wrist pin in because the bushing was a little bit too long, 7 thousandths, I think he said. Anyway, so the pistons are ready. Obviously, I got to put the rings on them. I got the crank here. Everything's been balanced, right? Ring set. This is new old stock of the rod bearings. That's the rod bearings that came off of the piston rods. You can see one of them here does show pretty good wear. You know, I didn't have them measured. Really no need. And then the crank bearings. So I'm going back to the Haynes, my weathered Haynes, and you know, the next step, engine block rebuilding, is putting the crankshaft back in. So that's where I'm going to start, and here we go. So the engine block, after sitting for like 9 or 10 months, doesn't appear to have corroded any. Little discoloration down in that journal, but I mean, I had it all sealed up with like painter's tape, so should be good to go. So I'm gonna start putting in these crank bearings. So I did have to go back and review the video I made when I took the crank out to figure out which bearing this with the edge goes. It goes in the middle, or number 3 position, I guess it would be. And you can tell because the block is actually machined to accept that. It's got a ridge there. So I think I've got all those in the right spot. I'm going to put some assembly lube on them and then nestle the crank in there. Alrighty, crankshaft's in. Now I'll put some more lube on the crank itself and put the bottom shells on. So fortunately, I kept the bearing caps in order because there is an orientation, and I reviewed the video, so you note that you got bolt holes in a certain sequence, and that is the proper sequence. And of course, this goes to the flywheel. So I'm glad I kept that together, and those actually are the same bolts in the same position, so I don't know that really makes any difference. But I think the way I'm going to go about this is just pull the bearing shell here on the bench, install the new shell, lubricate it, and then put the bearing cap in the motor, in the block. So it turns out these rod caps are actually numbered right there. And that gives you an orientation and the sequence that they go in. So that's very handy. All right, I'm going to torque these down to the values prescribed in the book. 58 foot-pounds on the bolts and 47 foot-pounds on the caps. So the Hayes manual just said it in a crisscross manner when you're tightening the bearing caps. So I just went here, 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 and then one last. It didn't really give a diagram, so I'm hopeful that is the right sequence. All right, let's dive into the rings. This piston has 3 rings. The contents of that package are actually labeled. So I have the first, the top, the second, the middle, and then the oil ring. Came with a little instruction guide. It's actually got some really helpful stuff in there. One of which is how you basically layer up the gaps. So yeah, if this is the front of the engine, your oil gap would be at like the 8 o'clock position. Compression or second gap would be 6 o'clock position, and the top oil ring would be at the 4 o'clock position. So that's helpful. Let me consult the Hayes about the gap itself. Also note that it says in the instruction sheet, if you're filing, you only file one direction. So you don't have burrs on the outside of the ring. So you always file inside. And yeah, I'll give you some more tips as I deal with them. So I have the top ring for number 1 piston in the bore. And you can see there's actually a label there. 0.5, which is the maximum according to Haynes. And then I got this tool, ring gap tool, which basically all it does is push the ring an equal distance down into the cylinder. So I don't know, I guess that's helpful. And of course I lubricated the cylinder walls doing all this. But so the label would indicate that these have already been gapped. I'll know when I pull the next 2 rings out if that's the case. So anyway, I'm going to extract this and go ahead and install it on the first piston. So all those did have the correct gap, if anything a little bit larger than 0.5 millimeter. The top and the middle are labeled as far as orientation. However, the bottom oil ring is not labeled, so I don't know that it really matters as far as which side up and which side is down. I'm pulling them out of the package basically because I noted that all the other ones in the package were laid out the same way, I'm pretty sure. Let me double check this. Nope, that one's upside down. So so you got nothing to go by on the bottom. And I'm going to put them on in reverse order because using the tool, it's like a stack. So you start at the bottom, work your way up. At least that's what I'm running with for now. So I got the rings on the first piston, and the oil ring, bottom ring, is a little bit touchy. It comes as 3 separate components, so you need to kind of to get it to nestle in there. I've got a tool to expand the rings. I'm having marginal success with it though, especially on the little thin oil components, ring components. It's got 2 little very thin, I'll show you here, those don't sit in that expander very well. And this actually has like a little stretchy thing, a wire in the middle that it expands quite easily by hand. So anyway, after doing the first one, I'm still kind of wrestling with the proper procedure to get those on. Let me do number 2 and see how that goes. Okay, got all the rings on. I need to figure out the correct orientation of the rods. I know the machine shop orientated the piston to the rod correctly, but now I need to make sure when I put the piston in the cylinder, the whole assembly is orientated. And then also I need to check where the gaps are on the rings at that point. The only note, what I did find was doing the oil ring, if you put in the wavy one first, you'll have better success getting the thin flat ones on either side of it. I mean, it's super important not to crisscross that, but you'll know once you kind of handle it and spin it, it should move freely. And if it's crisscross, it'll bind up. It won't spin very well. So let me double check my video regarding orientation, because I know the rod caps are labeled. So, and I know that's in my video, and that way I'll get that stuff in the right spot. So what I saw in my video is that the stamp on the connecting rod reads basically from the rear of the engine in the proper orientation. And that follows with everything else in here regarding the bearing caps. They read from the rear of the engine and their orientation. However, the crank reads from the opposite direction. But I'm pretty sure I got it right. There is no, there's only that odd little bump on the J&E piston. There's no mark as far as what goes to the front. Not that I've found yet. But all the oil galleys appear to be symmetrical, so I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to go with the rod cap because I think that's of more importance. So I need to put the bearing in there before I drop it in the cylinder. I'm going to go ahead and lubricate these where the connecting rods join the crank. Put some assembly lube on them, and then should be ready to move forward. Okay, as I'm doing this, one important thing so you don't have difficulties, you got to kind of note where your crank is in relation to the rod end, and make sure that rod end is squared away as far as, because if you got the piston turned or whatever, that won't go over the crank, and even though your rings are compressed, you won't be able to stuff it. So it's basically a matter of just pushing it in carefully, and hopefully everything lines up. All right, pistons are all in. I've verified the orientation on the rod numbers is correct. And I've got them laid out over here. So all I have to do is match them up and torque them down. So yeah, I just noticed something on 2 and 3 when I dropped the pistons down the cylinders, the bearing shells came out of the rods. So I'm gonna have to redo those. I double checked this 1 and 4. They're okay. I got the caps on them. So I'm gonna spin the crank and I'll have to drop those pistons back in, but I'm actually getting pretty good at it. So yeah, you want to make sure those bearing shells are in the right spot. Okay, so rod caps are on and torque down, and everything seems to be spinning nice and smooth, I think. I really need 2 hands to do that, but we'll double check that. Next step in the Hayes manual is the rear main seal, I believe, or it said oil seal. Maybe it's the one that goes over here. And then the oil tube goes on, and then it just says to repeat all the ancillary stuff, which there's a lot. So anyway, we'll say this is a done deal on the bottom end, and I'll start another segment when I get a seal kit. Thanks for watching.